Good afternoon, and welcome to episode 3 of the Game of Zen podcast, where we discover and talk about how Zen affects our work and life. I'm pleased today to be with my good buddy, Paul Augustinelli, a Zen teacher and entrepreneur. I'm from Boulder, Colorado. How's it going today, Paul?
It's going really well. I'm happy to be back in Boulder. We've got an unseasonable thunderstorm going on outside, which is just beautiful.
Nice. Well, we also have another Boulder resident checking in. We have a special guest today, Geoff O'Keeffe. Hey, how you doing, Geoff?
I'm doing well. Nice to see you both, Paul and Scott. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks for joining us. So, Paul, why don't you give us a little intro into Geoff and how you met and take it from there?
Great. Well, I've known Geoff for a long time, a little over 20 years, and we've practiced Zen together for all that time. And he's a main member of my Zen Sangha here in Boulder, assistant teacher as well. Geoff's had a long, successful and circuitous executive career primarily in the outdoor industry. And he's been really called to apply Zen and to practice Zen in a pretty high-powered professional setting for a multinational corporation over the years. So he's got I think, some good insights and good sharings around integrating Zen practice into professional life, especially. So, Geoff, really thrilled to have you here. And why don't you say a little bit more about yourself, your path, and then we'll get into it.
Thank you, Paul. And I'll keep it somewhat brief. But I found my way into business avocationally. I had been a mountain climber and backpacker and wilderness traveler, and as a kid in the late 60s and early 70s, and found myself with an opportunity to work for a relatively small outdoor retail chain in Southern California. And when I say outdoor, what I'm referring to is the kind of stuff that you would buy at REI. I think most people relate to that. Brands like the North Face and Patagonia and things like that. And I started off at a somewhat entry level, managing a distribution warehouse for a chain of 4 or 5 stores in California, and got caught up in growth of that company and a partnership. And at the age of 27 or something, found myself a vice president in a company that very quickly came to an end around, and I'll avoid telling stories out of school here too much, but around people doing corrupt stuff. And as a young idealistic guy who thought, we're all outdoor people and we all read poetry when we're on the peaks, and why can't we all just be nice and not try to steal from one another? And I and another fellow, frankly, stumbled onto what was really embezzlement internally, and it really popped my bubble. So I didn't want to get too specific, but that was a somewhat ignominious beginning to this. I've gone on to be to work at Patagonia, which is a multi-billion-dollar company these days, managing their retail stores around the world, to being president of 5 different outdoor brands, and I was part of a .com pure play retail startup in the outdoor space, and finished my stint as a VP of global supply chain for a group of companies, and thoroughly enjoyed the last few years of my work there. So that's kind of a recap. And as Paul had said, for the most part, my Zen practice, and I began in the outdoor industry in 1976. My Zen practice almost exactly coincided with that career, time-wise. So I don't think that means anything. I just think it was a coincidence, but
well, I think it might mean something, Geoff. So let's talk about it this way. So when you started down your career and you came across things that weren't right, as you mentioned, you were also learning Zen and practicing. So how did you, apply your learning to deal with these situations?
That's a really good question, Scott. And uh, there are so many examples of one of the things that we learn in our practice is that there are opportunities for us to do the practice all the time, moment by moment. We don't have to look for them. We don't have to manufacture them. We don't have to contrive them. They're natural. They come up. And in this context, in the business context, that was certainly the case. And there's so many different examples. But in the face of in the face of some of those challenges, one of the things it took me a while to learn, but two things that seemed contradictory appeared to be true to me. And I reminded myself that what was going on was not about me. And then very much the case, what was going on in terms of my reaction to it was all about me. And that was my practice. That was my practice. I had I'll just do a few examples, but I went from being a senior VP in about a $25 million company that in California to kind of in the middle of the pecking order at Patagonia, which was orders of magnitude bigger and more complicated and more political. And I really was confronted with kind of this big ego thing. I'm not the top dog any longer, and I really had to kind of swallow that. And so practice at the time was essential to be able to just be still in the midst of my reactions and and other things more overtly that were going on that were challenging, and it was priceless. It was priceless that I had that to fall back on.
So Paul, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the beginning, like you've known Geoff for 20 years. Like, how have you seen him evolve and apply the teachings to these situations?
Yeah, one thing that comes to me is how he dealt with the process that unfolded for him when I believe it was a hedge fund took over one of his companies, and some of the, I would say, lack of integrity, perhaps, and lack of certainly transparency in that process, as they kind of really destroyed the culture, I think, of the organization that you had been working for a long time. And it's, I think, one's first example or one's first response is to look at what's happening and to demonize the people who are doing it. And then one's own ego can really get wrapped up in it. And in fact, it's almost impossible for it not to get wrapped up in it. And I watched Geoff go through that process of just being really angry, but then also taking that essential next step, which was to discern, well, how much of this is because things aren't going the way I want them to, or the way that I think they should be handled, and how much of it is, a really objective, or let's say selfless kind of view, like a wise view of like, well, this is really going on. And I watched you go through that process, Geoff, and it took you, I'm going to say months actually, to sort of divest your own self-interest and your own perspective, like investment in your own perspective, from the clear seeing of what was going on. And then you acted, I believe, at that point, and you acted in a way that if I'm remembering right, you can say more. It put your job at risk, and maybe you might even have left the company. There was no protection there. So I wonder if you'd just share something about that process.
Yeah, and yeah, thanks for that, Paul, and thanks for your memory too. Perhaps better than mine. And just environmentally or landscape wise, the outdoor industry grew up, very idealistically. A bunch of hippies who went to the mountains started companies back in the 60s. A lot of them in the Bay in San Francisco Bay Area. And things were very idealistic for a long time. And nobody really cared about us. It was like rock and roll in the early days. Nobody cared. It wasn't big business yet. And then and then people got interested. Wall Street got interested, private equity got interested. And it was just what happened. And it was just what happened. It was kind of the arc of this industry. And I think they all have arcs, don't they? And so what Paul referred to was happening all over the place. And people who were not the founders, people who didn't have necessarily the heart and soul of the original culture, uh, were taking over. And I was very judgmental about that because I came out of this thing. I was part of the tribe, and I was very protective of it. And it really gave me a chance to look at that because, and I don't want to wax philosophical, and I don't want to say anything silly like because the outdoor industry is a microcosm of life, but maybe it is, or maybe it was. And we're born and we live and we peak and we get old and frail and we die. And that hasn't happened yet necessarily, but it maybe in the process. So I was kind of at ground zero for that a few times, and Paul's right. I was angry about it, and I, maybe it was just shifting perspective. Maybe it was just exhaling enough to let it go. And the practice aspect of it was really interesting for me to both simultaneously let go of my insistence on that it had to be a certain way.
Yeah.
Without letting go of my caring about doing it the very best that I possibly could. And that's a heavy lift, or at least it was for me.
Yeah. I think it is for every entrepreneur, Geoff. I mean, and there's always things that happen. It's happened to me dozens of times where I've had to just force myself to let go. And a lot of times it could have been anger at something that happened, or it could have been attachment or clinging. I think about that a lot. And I also think about impermanence. This is something I've learned a lot from studying. And, nothing stays the same in business, right? Just like life. And things change, right? But if we learn how to let go, we can move forward better. I found that many times when you hold on to something, it gets you stuck. And so talk about how that, like when you let go, something changed and you moved to a different level or a different place.
Really good question. Letting go of that insistence on things being a certain way changed my relationships with the people. That's what first comes to mind. If I thought about this longer, I may come up with something to add to that. But that was really what I experienced viscerally or immediately was I wasn't demonizing people as I might have been before. And I experienced, I won't say necessarily deep intimacy with them because that would be exaggerating, but connection and in some cases perhaps a bit of understanding of this is why they're doing what they're doing. And and they're coming out of a different set of circumstances in their life, both personally and professionally. And I could see that.
Yeah,
That's probably the most profound thing. Yeah.
that's great. That's really great example. Paul, what is when you talk about the Noble Eightfold Path, like what is Geoff doing to get, right view? I mean, there seems like he's following it and he's leading himself to a better level.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, right, livelihood is kind of the front of the prow of the ship here. But it includes right understanding and right view and a right speech and right action, are all kind of wrapped up in that. And it's at the times of crisis or intensity in your work life when your right livelihood is challenged, right? That's where it's to kind of it's easier to go along and just say that everything is fine, but it's the challenging parts. And as entrepreneurs, those who are entrepreneurs, it's always challenging. So that's why it's a great practice opportunity just to be an entrepreneur, because every day is a opportunity to practice right livelihood, including all of those different aspects of it, because it's always such a living, organic, environment. I wanted to say something about the reflection that Geoff just had about letting go of your view of what the leadership was doing, and that kind of you were able to drop your judgment around that and give it a bigger context. And I think what the Buddha has helped us see with his noble truths, is that we're all kind of perversely incented in some ways to use this term of economics. And we can look at businesses and we can say, well, the leaders are kind of they're leading this organization according to some perverse incentives, i.e., they just want to make as much money as they can and they don't care about anything else. And I think most of us would agree that is kind of a perverse incentive, right? We want a more values driven, leadership in our organizations and certainly in our own lives. And that's true. We want to live up to those values. But none of us are perfect. None of us are lily white. We're all driven by these perverse incentives of greed, hostility, and ignorance. We have them laced inside of us. So letting go of judgment to the others, we also have to respect that, we have these incentives with ourselves. And I think when we do that, it opens up the whole situation to a more humane, assessment. And then when we can hold ourselves to a standard of integrity, it's like I recognize I'm greedy and I'm holding on to my view here. And if I can loosen that up, then I can loosen up the energy of conflict or opposition, that I'm holding against this leadership here, and it becomes much more workable. It becomes a much more of a human kind of activity, and that's what Zen practice, wants us to grow into.
Yeah, thank you. That was great, Paul. So, Geoff, I want to get back to something you said earlier too about the ego and dealing with people's egos and your own, and to Paul's point just now about your own, how you deal with it. But like, how do you, when someone's doing something wrong, or they're not in the best interest of the company, but they're the boss or they're above you, like how do you deal with that and maintain your sanity?
Yeah, a good question. A good question. Um, I find myself wanting to say that, that there, and I didn't experience it this way, but in retrospect, I feel like there's kind of steps in this. And for me personally, my getting comfortable with letting go and not being rocked by behavior and bad business decisions or self-serving business, whatever it might have been. That was a necessary first step. And Scott, I hope this gets close to your question. The next one for me was, once a little more grounded that way, once a bit less reactive, I had the opportunity, and perhaps I could put it on myself, I had the responsibility to act and to step forward, and in some cases, judiciously, coming from the right place, to say, no, we're not doing this. This is wrong.
Yeah.
And to be willing to experience fear of losing my job, or being blacklisted, or whatever stuff comes up, and as we all know, plenty comes up when you confront, when you do truth to power, plenty comes up, because just even within the statement, because it might not be true.
Yeah.
There's I'm never absolutely sure that my position, even if I'm coming from a non-reactive place, or a quiet place, and I'm going to stand up and say, stop it, we're not doing this anymore. I could be wrong. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know if that speaks to your question.
Yeah. No, that was great.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Paul, like, as a teacher, and dealing with entrepreneurs like us, how do you frame this from when you first meet with somebody? Like, how do you talk about dealing with stuff that's unpleasant at work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, first I want to say, it's a practice for me too. This is always, always an everyday practice. So it's endless, endless development. But I think the how I start with people is to recognize, is to coach them into recognizing, what's really arising for them in the situation. Because a lot of times the anger, the discomfort is coming, and the judgment is so immediate. It kind of takes the place of what's actually happening inside the person. So they could be getting mad at something, but they're not really clear about what they're getting mad at. So the first step is always to really clarify what the response is within a person, what it is they're actually responding to. And sometimes I'll ask somebody to talk about something, and they'll say something about something their boss has been doing, and it doesn't sound that bad. I might say, it sounds like there's a kind of a constellation of things that are going on here, which is causing you to have this reaction. It isn't just this one thing. So that's really the first thing, is to really get clear around what one's own internal response are, and only then can you really see clearly what's actually going on in the outside. And that can be a process. That can sometimes take weeks to really discern the different aspects and relationships within, say, one's business environment that are causing reactions, right? So another way to put it is, like, we're all a hot mess.
Yeah.
Especially entrepreneurial. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
money's always an issue.
Yeah.
So there's the fear of financial resourcing. There could be a discord in a key relationship that you have, right? So there's an aspect there that's going on. Your partner, your husband, your wife, your family might be causing some emotional strain, right? So all of that gets mixed up, and we're pretty much all a mess.
Yeah.
And we tend to act out in different ways, but just reflection, reflection can really allow that to settle, and we can really be more responsive and notice our reactions to specific things and get clear on it. And then when we do that, everything is workable. Everything's workable. But when it's this hot mess, it doesn't feel like it's workable.
Well, first of all the above with the hot mess illustrations that you have. I've had all of them over the years. And I will say that practice is really good. And since I've been working with Paul the last few years, I've gotten better at that, at just dealing with the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur. And I think, you have to think about it, you have to meditate on it, and you have to just change, really. You have to change how you're, and I think, Geoff, what you're illustrating is that over time, things change for you. I'd like to talk about, the teachings that you've gotten first from Paul and everyone else, and now your own teaching, how you're going to translate that for others.
Interesting question. And without trying to sound clever, I feel like rather than adding on teachings or ideas or philosophies, I feel like I'm pulling them away, and what's left, what's left there is, being still, and as we say, just this, a reminder to myself over the years, like that, like just this. Or another one, and I Paul will probably remember where this came from. So much of this in business is relationships with people. I mean, there's no conflict without people there, and there's no organizations without people there. And something that I reminded myself, thousands and thousands of times, was just the two-word phrase, also me, and not really trying to put on the idea that this character who was doing this behavior that was troublesome, that somehow we're the same guy, but I'm capable of that, and I'm very familiar with that, and I could be doing that, and perhaps I am him. So you asked, and how would I bring that forward? I'm unlike you two. I'm not counseling business people at this point. So I'm not sure I have a good answer for that, other than encouraging people to stay in their body, to stay in the present, to stick to the moment, listen very, very carefully. I mean, these are cliches, aren't they?
Yeah.
But
No.
and we all know them. Somebody says something that you're going to react to. Give it 5 minutes. Give it 24 hours.
Yeah.
Interrupt that quick reaction. So often those can go wrong.
Yeah, I think deep listening is something that I've gotten better at since I've been studying and learning and practicing. I've become a better listener in business meetings and also just with personal relationships. So it's also just another thing about like bringing it forward to others. Like we can do it in the workday, we can do it with our family. We can do it with people at the supermarket. It doesn't matter. That's what I really like about all these lessons that we've learned.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul, and others.
Yeah. Hey, Scott, I've got a question for you because you're also in an industry which has kind of an interesting cultural evolution, the cannabis industry, where it used to be, even on the edges of the law, and now it's becoming, more legal, more institutionalized, and, the financial infrastructure is becoming bigger with more money. And so I just wonder whether you've, come across challenges with working, with the different types of agents at play, in the industry.
You could say that, yes. There's definitely, yeah. This is not like other industries, and there's been a lot of challenges. And I really believe that, my skill sets that I've learned is how to deal with it, right? I've been dealing with it better and better as time goes on, because what happens in cannabis is a lot of people like cannabis and they want to and they think they should be in business just because they like it. And I always say, just liking weed does not make you a weed entrepreneur, right? You need to be an entrepreneur first and then understand the culture around cannabis. So there's a lot of people that do both. There's a lot of great people, but then there's legacy operators or people that are just in it for fun, and they're not serious business people, and it's hard to, interact with them at sometimes. But Overall though, I do find a lot of really good people, and I find people that are spiritual. I've gotten some of them, involved with some of this, send some books around to people to listen to it. And so I hope it's, the nature of the cannabis plant would lead people to come together. That's one thing that's fun about our industry is people are brought together by it. But you do have your sharks, you have your ego, and you have your people that just don't know how to scale and build businesses. So I've been through more than a few frustrating times, but to your point, Geoff, like you learn over time how to deal with it and let it go. And I'm in a better place now because I'm doing that, but I'm also practicing every day. It's not, it's still going on all the time, the learning.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, as you talk about your industry, Scott, again, it's reminiscent of where I spent nearly 40 years. It's similar kind of a thing, I just climbed Mount Rainier, and I really love the outdoors, and I think I'm going to start an outdoor company. And you know,
Nice.
there's a tenuous connection between the two.
I just have one question about the outdoors angle here. Like to me, I love the outdoors. I'm a nature nut. I love it. I love parks. And I just feel like there's a certain tranquility and peace that you get. And I like to meditate and walk outdoors. So how did that blend into the culture of those businesses? Like, were there a lot of people who were, kind of like you that were really, into all that?
If you go back to the 70s, everybody was,
Yeah.
and that lasted, and it's still largely the case today, not entirely. There are people who are not involved much or at all, who have come in really more on the equity side of things, and bought companies, and are managing them. And then there's some really wonderful examples of where people came in from the outside with big business skills. There's a fellow who came from the Nordstrom family and bought an outdoor company, and I don't think he was necessarily that much of an outdoor guy. And this was 25 years ago. He is today. He really got the bug. He really caught the bug. So it still
Yes.
has some of that tribal, avocational, passionate element to it, which is
Mhm.
charming and
Yeah.
nice. It's lost some too, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, we need more of it in every industry, which is why we all need to learn this stuff and pay attention very carefully. Paul, Geoff, this has been really great. Thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to leave any contact information or anything about what you're working on?
Well, and is that to me, Scott?
Yeah.
Well, of course I would. I'm as Paul knows, I'm the executive director of Zen Peacemakers International, and we are a nonprofit organization of about 6,000 members in about 30 countries, involved in engaged Buddhism. And so we're involved in, homelessness, food insecurity, the prisons, war and peace issues, bearing witness to genocide in history, women's issues, end of life care, a number of different focus areas around the mandala of what we work on. And we are decidedly interfaith as well. Even though Zen is in the title of our organization, and it's our origin story, we are by mission deliberately interfaith. So, all kinds of branches of Buddhism, but we have, Jewish rabbis that are members, and Catholic priests, and Episcopal priests, and Sufis, and people who don't identify one way or the other than that they're based in contemplation and they're interested in social action. So zenpeacemakers.org is who we are.
It's fantastic, Geoff. I'm going to look into that more. It's really wonderful work you're doing.
Yep.
Cool. Paul, first, I want to ask how we get in touch with you, and then I'm going to have a request at the end. So how can we reach you?
Okay, well, zenatwork.org is my website, and paul at zenatwork.org is my email. And you're welcome to reach out and make a connection. And I'd love to. I work with people individually, And I put out content in newsletters. We'll have those in the show notes that you can subscribe to.
Yeah, I recommend the newsletter. I love it. All sorts of good stuff. So, Paul, we're going to try something new today. We're going to finish this podcast episode with some words of wisdom from our Zen teacher. Take it away.
Okay, I don't know about words of wisdom, but maybe a helpful practice. First, I want to say, Geoff, I think we'll have you back in a while to talk about the Zen Peacemaker activities you've done. We wanted to focus today on what's probably a more common environment for people in the fray, as you put it. The fray of a non-values based or mission based, corporate experience, which is probably what most people, are involved with. So, yeah, what really resonated with me here was, in fact, you used that word fray, Geoff, and we've been talking about the fray of being in a work environment. And, I use the term hot mess. So the hot mess is like the internal state and the fray is the external state, and they kind of mirror each other. So I think a helpful, pointer, and we can do this as a short meditation, is to really recognize and own and feel our hot messness. All right. People think meditation is about calming down and about forcing ourselves to be peaceful. And that is exactly the wrong way to go about it. So all your attempts to stop whatever's happening within your system, body and mind, are just going to increase the activity. Right? What you resist persists, you could say. So if you try to change anything, it's actually going to perpetuate it. The way to really find peace is to just fully accept everything that's happening within you. Right? So we can do this at any time, is just to take a moment, ground yourself in your body, in your seat, in your feet. Take a breath. And just tune in to whatever's going on with your body and mind. For most of us, it's quite a bit. Feelings moving through the body, rumblings in the belly, temperature in the heart, pressure in the head. Let's do a scan and notice it. The thought stream. We're mostly filled with half conversations, words, half sentences, veering off from one to another, images, memories. Just let all that be. And we can even vocalize, I'm a hot mess. I'm a hot mess. And it's perfect. We stay with that for as long as is comfortable for you. A minute, 5 minutes. Oh, that's my hot mess meditation for you.
That was excellent. Very nice. Very nice, Paul. We are all a hot mess. That's the lesson of today's podcast, but there are ways out of it. Awesome. Thank you both, Geoff. It's a pleasure. We would love to have you back. Thanks again for coming on today.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Geoff.